Welcome to the Wealth Studying Podcast. This is episode 468. Today is April 20th, 2025. I'm your host, John Pugliano. I'm also the founder and money manager at investablewealth.com. Today I want to take a deep dive into a really critical issue, and it's not specifically about the stock market, but it is about the direction of the stock market, not over the next few days, but over the next few years and actually decades. I think we're at a unique inflection point in world history. We'll get into all that in a second. Bottom line on the markets, because everybody always wants to know where I think the direction of the market is. Listen, I have no idea at this point. And it's not because of all the, quote, uncertainty that everybody's talking about in the media. Listen, there's always uncertainty. That's why you hear me say I can't predict the future. What's so obscure about the markets right now is that it's really a waste of time trying to use technical analysis or fundamentals or balance sheet analysis, because none of that matters. The only thing that matters over these past 3 or so weeks in the stock market has been tariff news out of the White House. And if that's perceived as good news, then the market goes up in extreme fashions. On the other hand, if it's perceived as bad news, it goes down in almost unfathomable terms. So listen, I'm just riding this out. I don't much care over the short term because I truly believe this is all a tactic. And as I've said before, it is nothing more than a policy decision. If the policies work out, then it'll be beneficial for the stock market. If the policies fail, they will be changed. This isn't existential. What is existential is what I'm going to talk about in this episode, which is the new era that we're in and we've been in for quite some time. It's just taking more form, and that has to do with national security and national defense. You've heard me talking about this many times over the years, but as we get more into it, there's also more clarity. And that's what I want to bring to it in today's episode. The United States is entering into a new Cold War period. This started before the initial Trump presidency. If you remember, Obama was making a shift towards Asia. That was a polite way to say that we'd recognize that China was more of an adversary than an ally or a trading partner. And then during Trump's first term, national security policy was specifically changed to talk about the concept of strategic competition. Now, those two words don't sound like much, but they are a huge change in direction from the policy, and not just the trade policy, but the national security policy over the previous 80 years. The tariffs that we're seeing right now are part of that. Now, I don't like the way Trump is handling the tariff situation in the way that he messages it, and in a lot of ways, even the way he implements it. But you know what? I'm not the president, so it doesn't matter what I like or don't like. I do wish that Trump was more like Teddy Roosevelt, that talked about speaking softly but carrying a big stick. I actually think that would be a much more effective technique. But to be fair to Trump, his chaos method does keep enough uncertainty out there that neither the allies nor the adversaries know where he's going to go next. And that's not necessarily a bad thing when you're fighting a war. And we are fighting a war. Remember the old saying that the first casualty of war is the truth. And both sides are playing that game very cleverly right now, so much so that I'm not sure if a lot of the distraction we see in the media is on purpose or if it's just because they're clueless. But part of that has to do with the naming of what's going on. Right now, you'll see the headlines about it's a trade war, it's a tariff war. Oh, it is a war, but it's neither of those. This is an economic war. And this is what's different about the previous Cold War. The reason I say that the emphasis shouldn't be on calling it a trade war or a tariff war is because these are just little skirmishes or battles. Remember during World War II, there were a lot of battles. There was the Battle of Britain, the Battle of Midway, the Battle of the Bulge. Well, we're currently in the Battle of Tariffs. Some of these battles with tariffs are going to be quickly resolved, like some battles were in World War II. Others are going to drag on. Others are going to come back and have to be fought multiple times. So it's a trade battle. It's a tariff battle, not a specific war. The war is on the overall economy. And the reason that's so different, and this is where it ties into the national strategy change that came about, I can't remember if it was, I think it was 2018 when it officially got changed. And that was strategic competition. Now, what's so critical to understand about strategic competition is that it's not what it had been in the past, which was a policy of strategic trade. Okay, coming out of World War II, the United States was effectively what China is today. The United States was the factory of the world. The United States not only came out of World War II the winner, but they were the only developed nation that had a domestic market intact and still had massive amounts of manufacturing that hadn't been destroyed, like in places like Germany or Japan or Britain. And so because of that, with the strong economy that the U.S. had and the devastation around the world, our national security policy became about strategic trade. We initiated things like the Marshall Plan that went over, and with American dollars and American know-how, that went over to places like Europe and rebuilt economies. Not only economies of our allies like the British or the French, but also the economies of our enemies. In Europe, being Germany, in Asia, being Japan. The point was that we could take our large dominant economy and all the prosperity from it, we could share that around the world and try and create an economic trading system that was fair and balanced and would encourage people to build their economies to make products and services as opposed to wartime economies where they'd want to invade their neighbor. This strategy became even more important after 1946, when it became apparent that the Soviet Union was going to be more of an adversary than a partner. And so not only did we try and encourage building trade and economies with our allies and our friends, but we also used our economy to either buy or bribe into other economies that were on the periphery to join us rather than the Soviet bloc. That effectively was the Cold War strategy for the past 80 years, ever since 1945-46, and that strategic trade meant that the United States would, more than any other country, open up its domestic markets and its economies to these other countries so that they could export their products to us, which would provide us a lot of products at an affordable price and would also help to develop their markets. Even in areas where it wasn't economically beneficial for us, meaning that we lost jobs or we lost key industries, things like the steel industry, we did it anyways under the guise of strategic trade being beneficial to promote world peace and global stability. We should have taken a hard look at that around the early 1990s during the fall of the Soviet Union, but we didn't. We pretty much kept that same strategy going. We got mired down in war on terrorism and other foreign entanglements, and we put our emphasis on those areas of defense and strategy as opposed to coming back and looking at the economy. Again, it wasn't until around 2018 that officially the strategy became strategic competition versus strategic trade. Strategic competition being we are no longer going to sacrifice the U.S. economy to promote world peace and stability. Because remember, the whole point was never the economy to begin with. The economy was a pawn that was used to promote national security. We gave away so much of our economy that we are no longer the factory of the world. We are no longer the dominant single economy. And so not only do we not have enough to sacrifice, we've got to take some of it back. We have given up too many key roles in strategic manufacturing and strategic defense sectors that what had been a manufacturing economy that was so dominant that we could afford to sacrifice it to other countries has now become a disadvantage to where we can no longer support key national defense initiatives. That's what's going on with all these tariffs right now. Forget what Trump says about equalizing trade deficits. It's not about dollars and cents. It's about strategic competition. We need to shore up our mining and minerals base. We need to shore up our steel and aluminum production. We need to shore up our manufacturing of semiconductors and electronic and computer components. Right? It's not simply enough to design things. We need to be able to put them together. And we doesn't necessarily mean it's all got to happen in the United States. That's not practical. But we've lost control of the supply chain. We saw that during the pandemic, and the military, the Pentagon, the defense infrastructure, they were aware of that long before the supply chain issues of the pandemic. It's just when the general population realized it. But that's what this is all about. And so much so, let me give you a quote from Jamie Dimon. You may know who he is. He's the CEO of JP Morgan. He is not a neocon. He's not a conservative. He's not part of the Koch brothers or the Heritage Foundation or American Enterprise Institute or the Cato Institute or right of center organization that you can think of. Jamie Dimon is a certified international banking globalist. He's heavily entwined in the Democratic Party, so much so that his name has been floated at very high levels to run for president back in 2024 and 2020, if not in earlier elections. He's highly respected in the banking community, in the business community, and specifically in the Democratic Party. I'm emphasizing that not because I think there's anything wrong with Jamie Dimon being a certified Democrat. I'm just using that as some credentials to what I'm about to read to you. Here's what Jamie Dimon just recently said in a note to investors. He said, "I really almost don't care fundamentally about what the economy does next." Now, that statement was in regards to, what's happening with the tariffs and is it going to be a recession or that problem it's causing with our allies. Do you hear what he's saying? He's saying, I really almost don't care fundamentally about what the economy does next. Why would an international banker not care about the direction of the economy? Well, here's the money shot. He said, "We failed to protect our national security, becoming too reliant on potential adversaries for critical products that the military needs." That, my friends, sums up what I've been talking about for a long time now about this Cold War, and specifically why it's an economic war. It's not about trade partners. It's not about balancing budget deficits. It's not even about bringing jobs back to America. It's about creating strategic competition in key areas of manufacturing and development and supply chain that can ensure that the United States can keep up critical national security functions. It was about this, and it would be about those matters whether Trump were president or Harris or Biden or Tweedledum or Tweedledee. This is bigger than who's president. It's about national security, and if you don't think that there's a deep state that actively handles and controls those issues, then I don't think you know enough about how the U.S. government really works. In any case, what I'm trying to lay out for you here is the fact that we are in strategic competition. We're in a new era of national defense. It's no longer a Cold War that's simply about military might. And in fact, that's really why the Cold War was a Cold War to begin with. It was a Cold War because it never got hot in terms of another global war, right? There was never a World War III, even though there were a lot of skirmishes, whether, again, it was the U.S. fighting the war on terror, or whether it was the U.S. in Vietnam, or for that matter, whether it was the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, you might have forgotten that, or even the Soviet Union invading its neighbors. You can go back to, I think, 1968 when they rolled tanks into Czechoslovakia, right? So none of this is new. So even though we had a, quote, Cold War, there were still plenty of hot things happening, just like today we have hot wars, whether it be Ukraine or Gaza or something potentially happening with Taiwan. These things can all happen as regional power struggles without it evolving into a global World War III, simply because the two biggest characters in this war are the United States and China, both of which are heavily armed with nuclear weapons. And just like during the old Cold War days, the United States and the Soviet Union basically came to a detente that was known as MAD, mutually assured destruction. Both sides knew that if they ever evolved into a full-blown nuclear war, that no one would win. The whole planet would suffer. We're still at that point, now just with it being the Chinese as opposed to the old Soviet Union being gone. But the new level, and why I'm calling this an economic war, is that we've also interlinked our economy with China in a way that we've never had done with any of the old Soviet bloc countries. We are intertwined to the degree that we can't unwind it easily or quickly. And so we have a mutually assured destruction of the economy if we were to totally decouple or to cut ties with each other. So it's really a two-level MAD situation. We can't use nuclear weapons because there'd be no winners, and we can't totally sever ties because, again, that would destroy the global economy. Wouldn't be good for anybody. That doesn't mean that we're at stalemate or we're at peace. It means that we are in an ugly divorce, right? I think that's the best way to think about it. Think about two partners that now hate each other, and yet they have a common interest, like children in a marriage. Well, in this case, it's an ugly divorce between the United States and the Communist Chinese Party, and yet we have joint custody of the global economy. It's not going to be pretty, but it also is not going to be total, utter devastation, because that doesn't benefit anyone. What it does mean, again, just like a divorce, is that these two adults are going to go out in different directions. They're going to build their spheres of influence. They're going to get on with their lives. And in the areas that they have to absolutely have mutual overlap and interaction, they'll do that, but they won't do it in a friendly manner. They're going to need attorneys and moderators, and in some case, intervention. But the bottom line is that neither one's going to destroy the other, because if they did, it would destroy themselves. And there's too much self-interest to totally cut their nose off to spite their face. That's where we're at, my friends. And hopefully in my voice, you don't hear pessimism, you hear optimism, cynical optimism, because it is going to be a mad situation that prevents both sides from totally destroying anything. The United States is putting in place industrial policies right now, and has been going back at least to the Obama administration. I could argue going back to George W. Bush, and for sure it happened during Trump's first term, and it definitely happened during Biden's term. Everything from the initial tariffs that went on China in 2018 that Biden never got rid of, to the additional acts that Biden put in place to shore up the national security supply chains. Things like the CHIP Act, things like industrial policy that prevented China from getting our highest military technology. We've already been through those Sputnik moments. We're living through a major change, a shift in national security that will not only define the immediate future, but if history is our guide, it's something that will move the direction of the United States economy for the next generation, right? We're talking not 5 or 10 years, we're talking 30 years into the future. For those people that think it's too late for the United States to get caught up, I think you're totally wrong. The reasons that our adversaries have got stronger than us in certain areas isn't because of weakness on the United States' part. It isn't because the United States doesn't have the capabilities. It isn't because the United States has lost the comparative advantage. It was a choice. It was a specific strategy we used, the strategy of strategic trade. We opened up our markets and we gave the advantages we had away. We still have the wherewithal to bring those sectors and technologies back to the degree that we need to, because the United States has the geographic characteristics that made it so strong to begin with. Whether it's the dual oceans on either side of the country, or the Mississippi River system that runs through the middle of it, the vast Midwest that we have for growing crops, the oil reserves that we have throughout the country, but specifically in areas like Texas and Oklahoma. The geography itself allows us to build the institutions that we have, which will allow us to dominate sectors and industries of the economy that we choose to, simply because we have the resources to do it. China is dominating in things like EVs and solar panels and rare earth manufacturing, not because they have a specific comparative advantage because of their geography or because of their people's innate ability. They have it because the Chinese Communist Party has created state-funded and run organizations to promote those industries. That's sheer, brutal industrial policy. We will create similar policies to counter that, and we don't have to do it as abusively as they have. We can simply do it strategically, as the new direction is called, strategic competition. We weren't trying to compete in these areas before. That's all changed now. We're going to go back. We're going to compete in key areas that matter. And we can do it because we do have the institutions and we have the geography to promote it. Think through history. The major changes that have occurred once the United States puts its mind to something. Whether it was the bombing of Pearl Harbor that put us full-blown into World War II, or whether it was Soviet Union launching Sputnik, which caused us to get into the space program and really develop all our advanced technology through the 1950s, or whether it was the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, which brought about the peace dividend, where we freed up all that technology that we had developed during the aftermath of Sputnik, all that technology that was locked up in the military because the Soviet Union was no longer perceived as a threat. We opened that up to the general economy, and that's what promoted all the technologies that we've been benefiting from for the last 30 years. Telecommunications, GPS, the internet, all the advanced electronics and computer technology, we would have never had any of it if it hadn't been developed because of Sputnik, and then if it hadn't been released by DARPA after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. So these eras have specific economic impact. We're on a different one, and it's not confining technology, it's spreading that technology across America and America's true allies in an effort to build up our manufacturing base in critical areas, and I think that's going to be not only fundamental to our economy going forward, I think it can be quite profitable. Right now, everybody's focused on tariffs and how that's going to restrict the economy. I want you to put your eyes on the future, which is on deregulation. As I mentioned, tariffs are nothing more than policy. The things that have held us back over the last 80 years have simply been policy choices. Those policy choices are being reversed. They're going to get reversed through something called deregulation. Watch for it to happen. It's an example I've used before, but it's a critical one. Look at Ireland. Ireland has a disproportionate amount of corporations for the little island that they are. Specifically, they have a huge concentration of global pharmaceutical companies. Now, it's not because Ireland has a comparative advantage in pharmacy. It's not that they have secret herbs that are growing on that beautiful Emerald Isle that allow them to compete so much on a global basis in pharmaceuticals. The reason they have the pharmaceutical industry that they do is because the United States has put policies in place, everything from tax policies from the IRS to drug policies that are created by the FDA, that have encouraged American corporations to set up business in Ireland. With the stroke of a pen, those policies can be changed, adjusted, or revoked that overnight would no longer make it advantageous to produce all those pharmaceuticals or at least have all those companies headquartered in Ireland. They could easily, with the stroke of a pen, they could easily be relocated and put in places like Omaha or Des Moines or Philadelphia. That's what you want to watch for. In the coming months and coming years, watch for deregulation and watch how that affects strategic competition in areas of manufacturing and technology that not only are designed to sustain our national security, but I believe are going to make our economy flourish and grow. And specifically, that's why I'm invested across the board in the stock market and everything from, owning Google and Facebook and Microsoft, but also railroads and medical devices and food processors and energy and utilities and uranium. Some of the companies I own have been in business for 50 to 100 years. They're going to do just fine in this coming transition of national security and strategic competition. As you've heard me say many times before, and this is no exception, we live in the most prosperous times in the history of humanity. Hey, on the other side of things, many of you are celebrating Easter or Passover, and my friends, may your families and your loved ones be blessed at this time of your religious celebrations. And for those of you that are not celebrating anything religiously right now, well, hey, God bless you too. Until next time, as always, this is John Pugliano wishing you the very best returns.